Good evening, everyone. Very nice to see you. My name is David Glassner. I'm the superintendent of the Shaker Heights City School District. And we are here this evening as part of the superintendent series that we've been holding over the past couple of months to help engage and educate our community on different topics that are relevant to learning today and learning in our school district. I am holding this postcard here, which we have over by the water and the drinks. This is the last of the superintendent series, but we have posted all of the previous superintendent series online on our website, and we will be doing the same this evening. So we are recording the superintendent series this evening so that we can help share the discussion that we have today with people who were unable to make it, and so that this can be a resource for the future. So I did just want to make everybody aware of that. You can see the camera in the back. I am holding a microphone. It is, as you can hear, it's not meant for amplification. It is just so that we can pick up the sound on the video. And as we have conversations, we will likely be passing around microphones so that we can pick this up on the video. Just a couple of other logistics. We are going to be having both a presentation and a conversation today, so there's information that we are going to be sharing, and also there will be opportunities to ask questions and have discussions at your table. We have found that that is a helpful way to talk through the topics that we have been discussing. I want to give a big thank you to Dr. John Moore, our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, standing to my right, and Jennifer Weisbarth, our instructional coach at the middle school. Both of them have a lot of experience and expertise with detracking, and we're very excited for the information that they'll share. I'll also be here to help answer questions as well. One last note about this evening. We have a number of different faculty members. Come on in if you're at the door. Come on in and grab a seat. We have a number of different faculty members who are here to share their experiences with detracking in their classrooms, and you will have a chance to ask them questions as well. We always think it's helpful to hear from our teachers who are doing this work in the classroom. Lastly, before we jump into our discussion and presentation this evening, I just want to highlight that I think having this conversation specifically in this space, I think, is especially appropriate. We're here at the Ludlow Early Learning Center, which launched this year. And the Ludlow Early Learning Center really represents what our community stands for. Our community stands for advancements in equity, in integration, in excellence, and making sure that all students have access to an excellent education and that they realize their full potential. And in a lot of ways, that is very similar for the work that we've done around detracking. And so I know here we usually work with our youngest learners, and detracking is something that is really more, has more of an impact on some of our older learners. But I think it is really kind of part of the same overall work and commitment to shared values that this represents. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Moore, Ms. Weisbarth, to help lead us, and very much looking forward to our conversation this evening.
Well, thank you, David, and thank all of you for being here and a part of this conversation. Jen and I have put together a couple of ideas to share with you tonight. It will be, as David said, an interactive environment, and part of our goal with that is to really model some of the strategies by which our teachers engage with the young people each day. That means today we have four main missions. One, we're going to welcome you, and we'll begin to warm up our brains around some of this detracking work. We're going to go in a little bit of a history lesson on how we got to this place and time before we have a rich discussion with our educators. And thank you again, educators, for joining us here tonight. We have representatives from both the middle school and the high school to share about their experiences. And finally, Jen and I will wrap tonight with a discussion of our data trends, including both growth and achievement, and we'll take some Q&A at the end as well. So thanks again for being here, and let's begin.
Sure. Thank you. So part of what Dr. Moore shares that we are going to be having a lot of discussions, and so when we were planning for this, we were reminded of some of the norms that we kind of that are kind of put in place for discussion. And so we just have those up there for you. The one that kind of resonated the most with me was the accept and accept non-closure. and speak your truth. We have an hour, a little bit less than that right now, to really talk about detracking. This conversation is a very rich dialogue. We have a lot that we could share, that we have been sharing. So we just wanted to kind of name it kind of up front, because we are going to do a little turn and talk in a moment to do our opening. So the opening there's envelopes at your table, and there is a fact and a fiction sort. So what is detracking? So in your envelope here, we have a fact or fiction. And so collaboratively with your group, sort them. Which ones do you think are statements that are true about detracking, and which ones do you think are false about detracking? And then we will ultimately end up giving you an answer key. So we're going to set a timer for about 5 minutes. All right, so if you could wrap up your conversation at the table. We do know that this probably is leaving you wanting to discuss a little bit more. We are going to pass around an answer key. There should be enough for everybody at the table, and if not, we have a couple of extras we can get you. I was trying to count. The hope is that during this, and our goal is to address a lot of these topics throughout our discussion today. And so that's why we're leaving everybody to have an answer key to kind of take alongside you. And then hopefully we'll tackle some of those conversations shortly.
So part of our goal with the fact or fiction warm-up was to model some of the strategies that our teachers engage in to provide accessible opportunities for students to engage in content, as well as construct or build relationships with one another. And you'll hear more of that from our teachers. Before we hear from them, we are going to do a little bit of a brief history tour of how we've gotten to this place in time. And this is certainly an abridged version. Shaker Heights was engaged in detracking and removing tracks for decades, but this really came to a height in 2019 when the board adopted its first equity policy. And if you go to the website and you read about the equity policy, you're going to see some ideas of, one, holding all students to high expectations, grade level expectations certainly, and beyond, and an urgent need to address the structural inequities which the district determined were creating disparate outcomes for marginalized students. So that was adopted. That was on the paper there. Then came the work of further defining and refining. Well, how do we achieve that mission? That teed up the 2020 strategic plan, which went further so far in Objective 2.5 to call for a revolution, if you will, around student assignment practices and, to a certain extent, the kinds of courses that we offer in general. Flash forward yet again, 2020-2021 school year is when this came to a head and the Detracking initiative began, with the explicit goal of ending the systematic segregation of children, really starting in 5th grade. And we're going to take a look at what that really looked like or meant. Prior to 2020, young people as early as 5th grade were being split, or I'm going to use this word purposely, and you'll see why in a moment, segregated into core classes and enriched classes. Now, we certainly weren't the only district doing this. In fact, many districts do. They call it leveling. The issue is when these levels persist for the rest of the educational career of that child, they end up creating what we would call tracks. And we'll get into more what detracking then is momentarily. When 5th grade core leads to 6th grade core, leads to 7th grade core, all the way up to 12th grade and beyond, those levels over time become very sticky. And a child's ability to move between those levels is virtually non-existent. Again, not a Shaker phenomenon, well documented in the research. Somewhat unique, potentially to Shaker, however, is due to the makeup of our district. What was happening was starting as early as 5th grade, students by race were being segregated. and about 80% of white children would go on to engage in what was called enriched. 80% on average of black children would go on to pursue core. And what that meant was that as early as 5th grade, after having spent all of their time together in what we would call a heterogeneous environment, PK4 or K4, at that point, it became this bifurcating event where students would split and, in most cases, continue on those two tracks, if you will. They call it tracks for that reason. That data is based on years and years of enrollment. It's based on assessment reports, and it was pretty consistent throughout the years. One thing to note, both in Shaker and in the research, other strategies that we had tried, open enrollment, removing prerequisites, what the research reiterates is that those are sort of biting at the margins for what was being presented here as a fundamental systems issue. This was the system of tracking that the district then pursued to disrupt. Now, one of the misnomers you saw, one of the fictions, and I do get this question, it's to say, so does that mean there are no honors classes? Does that mean we've taken those enrichment opportunities away from young people? I would contend the opposite is the opportunity, or at least our goal, meaning to say that young people have an extended runway to be able to get the prior knowledge and the prerequisite skills to then be successful in these kinds of courses at high school. These, in fact, are our current offerings in our high school. We still have our 9 honors progression leading to upwards of Calculus 3, if that's of interest, as well as many other wonderful options from which to choose. Jen, would you like to add anything to this?
No, I
Okay.
think you summarized it well.
Thank you. Jen will tell us a little bit
Yeah.
more what these supports look like in place.
So with the tracking, we realized that we were raising the expectations for our courses and what was to be expected of the students to perform at or above grade level. And so when we started to unpack the MTSS framework, we noticed that there were some opportunities to support. And two things that we do at the middle school right now is we have a math intervention course and effective co-teaching in our math classes that really try to highlight and elevate and support all the learners in the classroom. We also have a reading intervention course, and we just adopted Lexia, which is Power Up, so it aligns well with what they're doing at the elementary level now, and to hope accelerate literacy and learning. And so we're trying to help close some of the gaps that we're seeing with students so that they can be successful in the Detrack classroom.
Yeah, we've noticed, and for those of you who MTSS, multi-tiered system of support, maybe that's a new term, but it's all the rage in Ohio and beyond, certainly. It's this idea that we have systematically constructed instruction at multiple tiers so that as students experience either challenge or acceleration, we have interventions in place to support them. We have identified gaps in our opportunity and additional interventions that our children need to thrive, as Jen so eloquently put. These are some of the key or core elements informing discussion, informing decisions around detracking, how we've come to this place. But I think what is even more powerful are teacher voices and their experiences, certainly. What is it like to teach in this environment or to lead in this environment? And we know you probably are coming here tonight with good, important questions that they're excited to discuss. So at this time, we would invite some of our colleagues up. We'll get our chairs assembled here. We can do that. And we're going to have a little bit of a panel, a Q&A, that we can discuss some of the experiences of what it's like to work in a detracked environment. Okay? So teachers, principals, if you'll come on up, we'll form a little panel right in this spot here, and we'll invite questions from the audience. Okay, colleagues, your name may be on here, but I think we would really like to hear who you are, perhaps what you teach, a little bit about your experience, and then we'll get into some Q&A. All right. Robin, would you like to begin for us?
My name's Robin Hegley. I teach 8th grade algebra at the middle school.
Thank you very much, Robin.
And I've been in the district for about 17 years.
Isaiah Wyatt, high school principal. This is the start of year 3, year 1 as high school principal.
Nikki Kerr, intervention specialist at the middle school. I co-teach with both Liesl and Robin, and this is my 10th year.
I'm Courtney Lindsay. I teach math at the high school, and I've been here since 2018.
Eric Foreman. I'm the principal at the middle school, 6 at Onaway, 2 at Woodbury, 2 at the middle school.
Back to Lindsay.
Liesl Bass, Language and Literature 8, well, middle school, and I've been in the district for 9 years now.
Thank you, esteemed panel. I'll just ask the first one, a little bit of a softball to get us warmed up. Just tell us your understanding, your experience, maybe a highlight, a story, something that comes to mind that you would like members of our community to know about what it's been like to live through this change, this transition. Want to start?
So when I started in Shaker 9 years ago, it was very uncomfortable. My classes were very segregated. I taught 8th grade language and literature, obviously, and we were divided into core and honors. My core classes had more African American students than my honors classes, and coming in as someone who's black, it was a little uncomfortable, and it looks a little different. I think we still have work to do, but it definitely does look different.
I think one of my excitements when I first started at Shaker, there were 3 levels of math. And so to see that 3 levels of math go to 1, I appreciate the opportunity that kids get to work with each other in that environment, and to see the different ways that we can kind of grow a community of learners together.
A highlight for me is IB Psych. So what makes this a highlight is the class has an IB level, AP level, and also a general psych level in one section. And so the teacher is able to differentiate to all of those levels, and the students are able to have these experiences together and engage in learning together. And when you go in the classroom, it looks like this room, and it's so inspiring to see, and I enjoy just having those opportunities at the high school.
I think a highlight for me working with some of our most vulnerable students is just seeing the confidence that it builds within them, within our co-taught classes. Today we did part 1 of the algebra EOC for the state test, and just seeing those kids when we give them their test scores, I passed, and just that excitement, like I can do it. Thank you so much for believing in me and pushing me, and it is just very, very rewarding. I know they won't say that it is easy along the way, but they definitely appreciate that reward at the end.
I'll just piggyback off of yours. The highlight is seeing students be successful when they are successful. It's not always easy. It's not always an easy road, but certainly there's a lot of success stories out there as well.
I hate to be last. That's a lot of good stuff. But I mean, I don't know what the data journey that you're going to share later, but I do think when you look at just raw numbers of the sheer number of students who would not have had access to algebra in 8th grade, who pass algebra in 8th grade, who then have access to classes at the high school is massive. And that was just by removing some barriers that we put in place. And so there are many, many students who are on a track to take IB AP classes in Shaker now who would not have otherwise been offered that in previous iterations of our curriculum pathways.
Well, audience, I'd like to give you the opportunity certainly to ask questions. You are welcome to use the microphone, or I can repeat your question if you like. Would you?
Would you like to go first?
Oh, here you are.
Has the Black experience improved since we've detracked the district? The numbers.
Oh, Yes.
why I felt like that question was for me. It's hard to say in language and literature. The classroom looks different, but I think that we still have some work to do in terms of building confidence in students. I don't know what it looks like at the high school where the students are choosing those tougher classes now that we've de-leveled. And I also have to remind myself sometimes that we are only 5 years in. And so we hope that the needle has moved, but I'm not 100% sure.
I would say there's still plenty of room to go. And the one thing that drives me is if I can look at our academic planning guide and predict what the students are going to look like in that course before I walk into class, meaning if it's an upper level math class, you can almost predict that it'll be all white. And so then when you walk into a class and that is the reality, then that's the measure for me that tells me I know that we have work to go. Where you can say the experiences are improving is the example that I gave you. That class is an upper level course, and that course is going to look like our hallways. And there are pockets where our courses do look like that. And then when you think about achievement, I think that's why the focus is MTSS, because now we're able to say students are in these courses together. We can identify where the gaps are, and we can identify how we need to intervene so that we can increase that achievement. So for me, in my first year, I'm able to get a pretty good sample of what currently exists and then build out as we go through the scheduling process to say these things will help close the gaps. So that's my experience.
Can I add on to that real quickly? I'm a Max Scholar advisor for the 8th grade girls, and we had a group of high school Max Scholars come to the middle school and talk to our 8th graders about just high school experience. And one of the things that they did say was that there are still very few of them in AP classes. And their advice to our 8th graders was choose the higher classes. People are going to try to bring you down and tell you not to do it, but do it, try it, because you never know, what your experience is going to be. Everyone's experience is not the same. So, I mean, I'm just trying to say through that conversation, I got the impression that not enough black students are in these upper level classes.
So, continuing on with your question. I don't need the microphone,
I'll
thank you.
just hold that awkwardly here, Mr. Reed.
Continuing on with continuing on with the very great question that you asked. What does success look like to Shaker schools with detracking? Do we use as the measure of success that math classes will have 25 to 30% of diverse populations? Do we say there are certain courses that we need to have smaller percentages of African American students or minority students? What do we use as a yardstick for success?
I'm going to add some complexity to that, I think, and feel free, to separate it out. But I am reflecting on, I have a 2010 graduate, male. It was rough, but he had me. I was independent, so I was available, right, to be at the schools, to be at the PD, all the things. But I'm curious, in reflecting on conversations I've had with students over the years, that belonging piece, I've spoken to girls and some boys that know they can do the upper level classes, but they do not want to be the only. And I'm just wondering, is there anything we're able to factor into all the things, the wonderful things you guys are doing that help with that belonging and creating a cohort that can move together maybe to overcome that feeling? So I'm hoping that kind of adds to getting to those success factors.
I think that having experienced the district as an elementary principal before before this detracking effort, when I think about success, the first step was ensuring that it was even an option, right? Like, we tried other things. Like, as an elementary principal, I got an email and said, hey, what students of color do you think are ready for enriched math? And often, because I think all of my students were ready for enriched math, I just put all of their names, right? Because at the end of the day, whatever metric we were using is invariably biased and going to end, my opinion alone cannot be the decision factor. So I think I think what Mr. Reed and what you bring up are things that we need to continue to work on. But step one was ensuring that our students have access to 8th grade algebra, which means that they can take IB classes because they're taking Algebra 2 as a 10th grader. And those things were not happening. They just weren't. And I think every district that is in the same position that we are is seeing those same results, because we often say as a district, systems are designed to get the outcomes that they're built to get. And that was what our system was doing. That does not mean there weren't individual instances where things were better or worse for individual kids, but by and large over time, we had to make large systematic changes. And if you walked in our building tomorrow and you went to an 8th grade math class and you 8th grade algebra class and you looked at the students in that room, and the culture of the room is very healthy. Now, in that classroom, there may be a student who is struggling with content and there is a student that is thriving in content. But the culture of that room is as healthy as any tracked or untracked class I've ever seen. And that's the effort of the teachers, but also the mandate to say we have to figure out how to make this work because it's what our kids deserve, so that they get to Isaiah with the opportunity to take the coursework that they want to and that we need to be encouraging them to take.
If I could jump in here, fantastic questions, and thanks to our panelists for sharing your experiences. What does success look like? I think there are things that we can measure and things that are a little less tangible. I know you've heard some of that already. In terms of what we can measure, there are certainly state testing data that we look at, other measures of academic achievement. And what we want to see high levels of achievement and high levels of growth across subgroups. So whether you're white, black, more affluent, or less affluent, or other demographic characteristics, those are not determining your outcomes. Also, there are lots of less tangible things that help us identify that this is working. I know, Vicki, you talked about sense of belonging. That's really important and also a little harder to measure. I mean, we have some survey tools, but it isn't always easy to measure that. I know I visited a detracking classroom where a black student was helping teach the class. And I think about the messages, explicit or implicit messages that we send in our classrooms about who can do what and what you're expected to become or what you're able to do. And I think it's really important for all students that everybody sees that they have the potential to engage in our most rigorous and challenging learning environments. I also want to caution us a little bit. I know, Leslie, you said we're only 5 years in, and I think that's exactly right. I'm not sure that we will ever get to a mission accomplished moment. We have accomplished what we set out to do, and we are done. I think the nature of education is that we are always growing and learning. There are things that we're doing now that are improvement on what we did 5 years ago. 5 years from now, there are things that we're going to be doing that are an improvement on where we are now, and there are still going to be places where we need to grow, and I think that is true of detracking along with kind of the general work that we do. Sorry, I know somebody else wanted to jump in.
I was just going to say, on a daily basis, what does success look like? It's the engagement of the students. We do a lot of vertical whiteboards. Some of you have been present in our series where we've utilized those instructional strategies, and just having students from all different backgrounds just be willing to engage. We do differentiate our problem set, so it's mild, medium, spicy. So students can choose which problem they're comfortable with, and they're willing to engage and work with each other and help each other out. And to me, that's success. And like Mr. Foreman said, that's the culture that we're trying to build within the classroom, which then carries over into language and literature. We're starting to try to utilize the vertical whiteboard space, building thinking classrooms in the language and literature classroom, having meaningful, rich conversations, discussion questions, utilizing facing history in ourselves, bringing in those aspects into our classrooms so that we can have these hard conversations and the students can start to see, you may not look like me, but we have the same thoughts and the same feelings about what's happening in our world and the injustices that people have faced or are continuing to face. So that, to me, is success on the daily basis, and that's how I measure it. If the students are willing to engage and be supportive of one another.
Just to reiterate what you said, and I was going to bring up a detracking meeting several years ago. Dr. Moore presented some data that showed the number of Black students who were passing the EOC in the 8th grade compared to long ago. And the numbers are definitely higher, so that's definitely a success. We've opened the door for every student to have the option of passing a high school level class in grade 8, and so that's like success point number one. Another thing that I was wondering if you were going to say is about bridges, trying to bring back a cohort model that we started several years ago and kind of fell off to the wayside, but we're bringing it back next year. And that is a model that's designed to create a cohort of students we think can really access something like AP US history and continue that support and have them feel like they have a group and that they're all doing it together, and that really, really makes a big difference, I think, in their confidence. And where I think we need to go to get more success is building the on-ramp. We're opening the door in grade 8 by putting everybody in Algebra 1, but not everybody is ready for Algebra 1 in 8th grade, so they're not all passing it. And then when we get to the high school, they're not all being successful in geometry, and they're not all being successful in Algebra 2. And so I think continuing that on-ramp to show that you can be successful in the upper level classes starts at the younger grades as well. We need to continue to challenge people more so they feel more ready to maintain their success when they get up to the top.
And I'll add into that bridges concept. So I just spoke about being able to see what's going on, assess, and then build out through the scheduling process. So bridges is a program that's working right now, and it's happening with AP US history, and that's the first AP offering that students can take in our high school. So there's a cohort that essentially supports each other. So what we said is, let's expand this, let's make this larger, and let's look at other departments. So looking at math and understanding which courses are going to provide that same level of access and opportunity. And so we identified 9 math honors as a course that we want to try to create a bridge to support and increase student engagement and go from it with the community model. Then we looked at also understanding and knowing Algebra 2, we're not like fully set in stone that we're going to build it out, but it's a part of our discussion now to look at the data and understand how are students doing. And there's also Algebra 2 equivalent courses. And so comparing those Algebra 2 equivalent courses to the Algebra 2 data and understanding what is that journey for our students and how does it impact their options as a whole. That's also a part of the Bridges conversation. And we're looking at building out intervention courses, which is that on-ramp piece. So kids now have the ability to access this level of rigor together, and what I'm able to see is that the level of support they need is not necessarily there right now. So that's why we're building it. And so thinking about putting intervention courses for Lang and Lit and also in math. And then we're also looking at bridges for our physical science course. So yes, we're looking to build those things, and we're doing it right now through the scheduling process.
Yeah, I just wanted to add also, I think that what the high school intends to do is really good, but I also think that support needs to start a lot younger. I think middle school is even too late. We need to start, and we have the opportunity to take a kid from pre-K all the way through 12th grade. Things like mentorship programs, study groups, these are things that, and I think Bridges used to be an on-ramp for eighth grade students to ninth grade honors, when they still offered ELA on the honors level in the high school. And I thought that that was a good idea. I'm not sure, how the program changed, but I do think that, support is key, and it needs to start a lot younger than middle school or high school.
Hi, so I'm a parent of a elementary age kid, so I actually don't know that much about what happens in the middle school and the high school yet. I guess one of my questions is, like in math, for example, how do you take such a wide band of kids, and you've talked a lot about the supports for the struggling kids, but for the kids that are like the spicy ones, how do you make sure they're not just sitting there with a packet, which is like some of what we've seen in the elementary years where they don't have as much access to, it looks like you guys co-teach. And so the manpower that it seems to take for some of this, I'm not saying it's not necessarily worth it, but if we're talking about how this is going to work from a younger age to be able to grow it to the middle school, it seems like there would need to be a lot more bodies to be able to do that. So I'd love to hear some of how you also challenge those kids who maybe are already in the middle or higher group and not lose their interest. And then I'd also be curious to hear a little bit about some of those challenges with, to me, math seems like a very difficult subject to sometimes teach a much wider band, and maybe this is my bias, than a book that lots of people could read and have different perspectives, whereas math, there's often like an answer that you have to get to. So I'd be curious to hear sort of those two things.
I didn't talk the last time, so I'll talk this time. I appreciated what you said, because that is the challenge. It is the challenge to go from, I always joke, 5th percentile to the 99th percentile in the same class. How do you reach all kids in the way that you want to? And we try and get better at it every year. I appreciated what was said is we're not, hopefully we never stop trying and we never stop improving. We make small tweaks every year. But one of the things I think that we do is so I teach 5 8th grade Algebra 1 classes. Only 2 of them are co-taught. So in those other 3 classes, I am trying to reach that span of kids in different ways. And one of the things that we do is we try and replicate ourselves through video lessons. And we try and trade on and off between which group. So it's not always the high group that gets stuck on a video, or it's not always a low group that gets stuck on the video. But you might have a group that might be ready for more, while you're working with another group that's kind of still building some of the basics, and that you might say, okay, today you're ready to move on. And so you're going to move on at the beginning of the class while I work with this group, and then while after you get with them, they're working an assignment while you check in with a group that's started to go up to that next level and say, okay, how'd it go? What questions can I answer? How can I support you in that way? So there's so that's one of the ways that we do it. Another way is we might do stations, and we might say, okay, this station is, we use Delta Math at the middle school. which is one of the ways that we provide scaffolding to kids, whether it's extension. For example, when we taught quadratics, I have some kids who are working on factoring when A is equal to 1, and that was kind of building the basics. I had other kids who are ready to solve quadratics and learn about completing the square, which not everybody was ready to. So they might go on to a Delta math lesson, preview it there, and then I'm checking in with them later afterwards. So it's a busy classroom. It's a lot going on.
What percent is like actual teacher with a student as opposed to like a computer or a video?
So I would say the videos are usually 10 to 15 minutes in a 42-minute classroom. So so what is that, 25%? I mean, I'm not, well, I would hope not to stick a kid on a video for, a half hour while they're not doing anything with me or with each other. So if there's a video that's between 10 to 15 minutes, they might then be in a collaborative activity with someone afterwards, getting feedback from a partner, getting feedback from a teacher, something that's giving them feedback. They might go from a video lesson that's 8 to 10 minutes and then go up to the vertical whiteboards where they're demonstrating what they just learned on the video while the teacher's checking in and getting feedback that way and then going back and practicing. You want to add on to that?
I was going to clarify. So when there's two of us in the room, oftentimes we're utilizing parallel teaching or alternative teaching, which are two different co-teaching models. So if we need to differentiate the lesson in the complexity, like she just shared with factoring polynomials, I'm able to teach a lower group and she's teaching the higher group. If she doesn't have two people in the room, we still need to teach those skills where those students are. And so one thing that we have found as a department so that we can create more instructional opportunities based on where the students are is to utilize our resources, like these short videos, lessons. So they're still getting the instruction at their level, and then they're doing practice afterwards. And it's very minimal. They're not on a computer for the entire period. They're not sitting there on a computer playing games. It's minimal, and then there's always practice and feedback afterwards. And that's not on a daily basis either.
In math, though, how is that not just a leveling within the classroom? What percent of a math lesson in 8th grade is taught to the whole community of the classroom?
So I would say
85%, or it's a lot of differentiation?
So the question is what, yeah, so if I'm going to try to paraphrase, or do you want, here. Okay, so I believe, so when you're differentiating the class, how often is it to everybody in the group? Is there a whole group lesson? What does that look like? Right, is that what you were trying to get at?
Yeah.
Okay.
We usually have 2 days. The first day is the introduction to that skill and concept, and everyone is receiving the same lesson. Then that homework for that day is leveled based on complexity for the students. And oftentimes we let students choose. Do you want level 1 or do you want level 2? And we have some students who say, I want to challenge myself. I'm going to do level 2. And they have that opportunity to choose. And then the next day we're differentiating based on what we see they're able to do on their homework or what we know that they're able to do within the classroom as we're working with them and we're clarifying misconceptions. That's when we differentiate on day 2 and go either higher for the students who are ready for more or reteaching and building more of those foundational skills that they may need to move forward within the unit.
So I just had a quick question. So on the paper it says that tracking systems often create schools within a school, and that's a fact. And kind of going based off of what she said, if you are reteaching things to certain kinds of students and then going on to just keep going with the lesson for other students, at least when I was taking the course when I was an 8th grader 2 years ago, the students being retaught were mostly African American, and the students who were continuing were white students. So how is I guess how is that not tracking? Because because that's exactly the definition of tracking right here on the paper. And as you guys are describing it, that sounds, I mean, it's what I experience as well. And I mean, yeah. So that was.
I can try to take a stab at that. I think a key difference here is that everything that's being taught is 8th grade algebra. When you track students and we say we're going to get kids ready, the things that we're teaching them are not grade level standards. We need to keep a bar for students at what the state of Ohio and the rest of the world is going to expect for them to do in 8th grade. Yes, there are students that are struggling to reach that benchmark, but we do kids a ginormous, that's not a word, disservice when we say, oh, we're going to get you there by having you not see what the expectation is. And what I see when I walk into our math classrooms and our L&L classrooms is the expectation is there. So if I'm a student who is at grade level, or in this case, we are advancing kids to algebra in 8th grade, which is it's a full grade acceleration, we are giving kids access to what the expectation is, giving them at-bats at that expectation. I have seen in this district and in other districts, and I've seen it at the elementary level, and I've seen it at Woodbury, where when we say, we're going to get you ready by having you here, and we're going to get you ready by having you here, we are not teaching grade level standards. And so one of the things that we talk about a lot, and we use our 8th grade algebra a lot as that example, because they've been at the crux of this from the beginning of this conversation in 2021 in that area, is the standard is the standard. And we as teachers need to get kids to that standard. So when we think about, like, you know, there used to be an adage that when I started teaching in the Eisenhower administration, that was this idea that you go to the middle and then you help kids extend and then you help kids scaffold down, right? And I think that's where that fallacy begins. It would be my philosophy now that we start with what that expectation is. In this case, it is passing that 8th grade EOC. And then from there, we build from it. And I do see students struggling with that content. I see students that are ready to exceed that content. We have students that are accelerated to a whole other grade. But ultimately, we are giving kids the opportunity that we weren't before by saying, this is what you are expected to do, and we're going to help you get there. It does not mean we are 100% successful, but that's ultimately what I think our teachers right now do an exceptional job doing.
Just a quick follow-up question. So you said that before that you were not giving all students, they were not meeting the standards of what an 8th grade education was. But if the students in the class who are falling behind and they are needing to be retaught, and as Ms. Lindsay said, they're failing, then again, like, I feel like that just falls back into what tracking was. And at least when I was in class, I overheard my teachers, they were talking like the students, the African American students who were in the class, and they kept needing to go to the lower level, or, as it's described, like beginning and then medium and spicy, like the ones who were just stuck at the beginning level, like they were all failing. And so how is that if they're all failing and they can't move on and pass that EOC, then how is that like just not tracking? Because if they're all failing, then really what is the point of doing that, I guess?
Yeah, you want to? I can take it.
So that's what I was going to say. They're not all failing. That's why I want to just address that. They're not all failing, and we see lots of successes. For, again, I know that somebody mentioned this before, students passing the test who previously wouldn't have even been in the classroom. So I think that's important to note. I know we recently got a chance to look at some of our MAP data, and we'll get to share some data shortly. But we're seeing lots of students fall in the high growth, high achievement quadrant of data, which honestly is almost unheard of, that across subgroups that we're seeing successes where students are making growth and also achieving at high levels. There is still room to grow, and I think the point you're highlighting here around like how do you ensure that groups are somewhat flexible in classrooms, whether it's math or other classrooms, is something that I think we've gotten better at, and also an area to grow in. I know when I've talked to students about their classrooms, some of the things they highlight is, I want my groups to be flexible, right? I don't want to have the same group every time. Sometimes I want to work with people who are at my level. Sometimes I want to work with people who maybe are at different levels than me, because we each grow from that experience. Also, students talk about, when I've talked to students about this, they talk about wanting, I think in EduSpeak we would call it an inquiry-based classroom, a classroom where teachers are helping prompt learning through questioning, rather than students just getting the answer. And I guess I just want to highlight, like, those kinds of things that students are highlighting are best practices in any classroom. And to me, that's one of the things that I think sometimes gets lost in this conversation. Effective instructional practices are effective in any setting. And where we struggle, I think, even in detract settings, sometimes has to do with the types of instructional strategies that we're trying to implement. And maybe we need to grow in some of those. I know, Eric, you want to talk about also.
Yeah, I think that question. Okay, I just want to make sure that I also responded to your question. And Emma, everybody, she's amazing. As far as supports are concerned, somebody asked about supports, and it seems like a lot of manpower. I also have 2 classes that I teach with Mrs. Kerr, and those 2 classes obviously run a lot differently from the class that I teach by myself. In a perfect world, if we want to be de-leveled, all classes should have 2 teachers, 3 even, to support those students on the upper end of the spectrum. So yes, support 100%. And I think we have to, at some point, define tracking versus de-leveling, because I do see within the classrooms that we are offering different opportunities for different students depending on where they are. Yes, they have the choice to do something different if they wanted to move up, but at the same time, a kid's confidence is going to be affected if they attempt something at a spicy level, but they're not ready for it. So a lot of times, maybe we suggest that we start here and we can move up, but we are essentially still tracking, I think. But I think we have to define that as a district, like what, tracking versus de-leveling.
So I have a question for Dr. Moore. Can you tell us what the names of the 9th and 10th grade English classes at the high school are currently? What are they named?
9 Langen Lit and 10 Langen Lit.
Okay, so they are no longer called 9 honors and 10 honors.
We'll look at our academic planning guide, but they are weighted, I believe, at the 4.5.
Okay, so here's what I want to say in reference to a comment about manpower and a follow-up about manpower and the heavy, heavy lift, especially of algebra teachers.
We're not helping our teachers here.
Okay. We are losing from the English department at the high school this year 4 teachers to retirement. And it's a sad, sad, sad fact. But I'm overjoyed for them to be retiring. We are told that we are going to replace one of them with a teacher who is coming over from the IC, and that we are not going to replace the other 3. And I want to point out that even though most of the conversation is about math, we have English classes in which the lift is just as heavy. It's just harder to perceive from the outside. If we have fewer teachers, we inevitably will have larger classes. If our goal is to bring everybody to the highest standard, we're not contributing to meeting that goal by staffing the department that way. That's not really a question. I just wanted to bring it forth in the context of the questions that were asked.
Well, in general, I was gonna ask Dr. Glassner, I'm hearing support, and we know in order to do this well, the teachers have to have the support they need to do it well. So I hope, and my guy's 2010, so I've been done a while, but I remember that difficulty then. And I can't imagine we're not going to hear this message and really ramp up the support for our teachers. We have to if we're going to succeed.
So one of the things that Detracking has led us to do is to infuse more resources into the classroom rather than taking resources out of the classroom. So, for example, literacy specialists. Now, I know that's mainly at the younger grade levels, but it's important for literacy specialists to be in the classroom, helping support learning in the classroom rather than pull students out of the classroom. Gifted intervention specialists, which goes all the way from our younger students to our older students. Having gifted intervention specialists in classrooms rather than out of classrooms. That's another way to get at additional adults in a classroom. Obviously, intervention specialists is another example where we're pushing resources into a classroom rather than out of a classroom. We have been going through robust and long-term look at our staffing levels. A piece of the maybe calculus that I would add here is that our student enrollment is going down. It has been dropping pretty significantly over the past 10 to 15 years, like many districts in the state and many states in the country. And so I'm not sure I agree with the premise that reducing teachers automatically leads to increases in class sizes, because a factor in that equation is also that enrollment is also going down, and we're seeing that trend for now continue at our schools from K to 12, and that is something that we look at. What is class size and how does it compare? And it still compares relatively favorably over the course of the past few years. One other piece that I would add, and of course, Dr. Moore or others feel free to weigh in, resources are scarce. I mean, we're very fortunate in Shaker that I think we have more resources than many other districts. And we know that resources are not infinite and that we need to allocate them in ways that best meet our student needs, that best support the reduction in disparities or narrowing of disparities in outcomes, reducing the gaps. I think Mr. Wyatt talked about that earlier. And we have difficult decisions to make. And so that is part of the planning process that we go through every year. We have put in place some systems to better analyze and evaluate and assess where we're at, and that will continue to grow and evolve as we monitor what's working and where we need to allocate additional resources or change patterns of staffing. I don't know if anybody else wanted to add on that before we move to another question.
I just want to communicate with losing the 4 English teachers, bringing over the 1 teacher from the IC. We did finalize earlier today that we're going to add 1 additional hire to L&L to support the efforts of detracking and also interventions. So that was finalized today. So I wanted to point that out so everyone would know.
Hi. So my question is around how we rebalance students in each one of these subjects as they progress. So if detracking is dependent upon students of multiple levels being in one classroom, so that students can see others at different levels, everyone's teachers aren't overwhelmed in one direction or another, then how are we kind of watching these students as they progress, making sure that classrooms stay balanced in, for instance, each one of the math classes, so that you have cohorts where students have some that are like them and some that are not, so that they can kind of have this experience year over year.
I mean, I can take an initial stab at it. So at the middle school level, about a third of our students in our district are identified as gifted in mathematics. So that's a very large number. But we, in looking at our classes, the way that we service gifted students is through a cluster model. And so there has to be a cluster of students within each math classroom that are clustered as gifted. So those are things that when we run our master schedule and we run our student load, we have to look to make sure those balances exist there, which then inherently is going to then help balance out the rest of the classes, right? While we don't we don't have students identified as gifted in science, we know that by having, they matriculate similarly. Some depends on what language they take, some depends on what instrument they choose to take, but we know in the ELA and math classes, we look to see that those cohorts exist. Same thing happens on the elementary level, it's just a lot simpler because the N is smaller, so you're just looking at each individual single classroom environment and making sure that that exists there.
Does that happen for students who are also at the other end of the spectrum?
Yeah.
So that you have a nice balance in each classroom?
Yes, so some of that is law, so like how many students with an IEP or how many students that on Ms. Kerr's caseload, and Ms. Kerr works with Team Epic, and so how many of those students are on Team Epic. Like a lot of that happens on the very front end. So much of our scheduling starts with what are students with special needs, because we have our staffing models for that, and so we have to make sure that that works first. We also have students that are struggling that do not have a learning disability, right? And so then we need to look to balance that out the best we can as well. For sure, for sure. Similar at the elementary, just on a much smaller level.
I know, like, there's somebody here who wanted to ask a question.
I have comments and questions. Sorry. I was going to say that for me, when I'm hearing this, I've had, I would say, like a lot of concern with what I'm hearing about how we are handling students in the classroom that maybe don't need help to come up. Maybe they need help being challenged. And it's very concerning to me to hear, well, we're going to give video. I don't know how many days we do that. I don't know. So that's my one comment. My second comment is this choice of homework. I don't love the idea that it's like one or the other. I think everybody should be pushed to the direction of doing the harder homework, because life is, you're not going to have your boss tell you, well, you choose which project you want, the harder one or the easier one. It's definitely going to be like you have a project and you need to deliver in the real world, I'm saying. And then third, I was going to say that it sounds to me like we're asking our teachers to do a lot with less. And if we have less students, it seems like we could figure out a way to meet more students where they are. I don't understand why we're putting so many people at different skill sets in one classroom and still really, in effect, saying we're detracking, but we're tracking in the actual classroom. It just seems like performative and not a real solution to our, I'm actually not even sure what we're trying to accomplish with it. I'll be clear about that. It's not clear to me what the goals are, but I will say I am concerned.
Yeah, this was Mr. Reed's question at the beginning. I'm not sure I got a super clear answer. I either be on like the access and then we're looking at other stuff, but like I'm not sure like when we look at the data, like how we're gonna know like we're looking at it and it's gonna be like, yep, we hit the goals that we set out 5 years ago, we're on the track to them, or we're not. Like I'd love to look at the data and like I'd love to understand, like back to Mr. Reed's question, what success is.
I really appreciate that, and as a segue, I just want to do a quick check. We are over our established time, but we do have a fair amount of data to share and a whole lot more we could link to. Just want to check in real quick. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes. So I want to circle back to special education. My granddaughter's in elementary on an IEP, and this is an area that is really concerning for me. And I worry about middle school and high school for her, and being in a setting. Right now she receives push-ins and pull-outs. What does it truly look like in a classroom for an IEP student and one that has several areas on their IEP and not just educational?
Super question, thank you. May I ask here, and if you don't mind also, for students who may have an IEP with additional supports, but also our math and reading intervention courses, if someone could describe maybe a bit of what that looks like. Who would like to begin?
So as an intervention specialist, I'm also one of the department chairs at the Middle School of Special Education, one of the co-department chairs. And so to answer your question, I can't do that unless I see the data and I see what your needs are, because every student on an IEP has various needs. We have a continuum of services where we offer from that self-contained classroom, which is the most restrictive, all the way to general education, where you're receiving all of your services within the general education classroom. Yes, I do service students with disabilities, specific learning disabilities in math or reading or writing, but I'm also servicing students with executive functioning needs or social emotional needs. So that's a very loaded question, but we do try our best to always ensure that students are placed in their least restrictive environment, because data shows that students are going to grow with high expectations. And so when we're writing these IEPs, we're always looking, what is that least restrictive environment? What is preventing them from being successful in that general education classroom? What supports do they need? Do they need just an additional support period once a week, twice a week, on a daily basis, so that they can still be able to be successful in those co-taught classes and just get that additional support? Do they need these intervention classes that we offer at the middle school with the Lexia program or the Math 180, and they can get those additional supports as well? So there's definitely a continuum services. I know the high school also has a similar continuum. If you want to speak to.
So there's a continuum of services, and what I know you want to hear is, how are we going to make these outcomes better? They can't continue to be the same year after year after year, where there's this huge gap with our students with disabilities and their academic achievement. And so we have the continuum, we offer these services, but there's a lot of questions that go into how are the students being managed on their case with their case managers? What is happening with the intervention? What are the plans? What is the proof that these plans are being successful? What accommodations are being put in place to actually lift the student up? And are those accommodations working? Like, there's a lot of analyzing of what's currently happening, and is it working, and do we need to pivot, change, or tweak? So to hear you say you have an elementary student and you're afraid of how they're going to be served when they get to the high school, that's real. Like, that is, I'm not going to sit and try to give you, oh, we offer this, that. We are looking to make outcomes better by any means, and we're trying to do whatever is necessary to make sure that our students are successful. Like, that is the answer. And your communication, your feedback, that's critical. We need to know what those experiences are, and we need to be able to match what you say from your home to what the data says inside the building and what the student experience is, and put it all together and say, this is what's needed. And so it has to improve. It cannot stay the same.
Thank you so much for that. Can I ask you, what does transition look like from school, from elementary to middle school to high school for special education students?
If you do, or I can.
Sure. So just on the the transitions between elementary and middle to, for special education specifically.
In the general education classroom.
Yeah. So students, all students between 5th and 6th grade, we have some transitional activities. And then over the summer, spring to summer, there are specific transition activities for students with IEPs. So Elizabeth, Aaron Jolich and Jen Curry, who are our special education supervisors, one is for pre-K5 and one is for 6-12, sort of manage that process over the summer to provide kids some of those connections, right? It's an ongoing conversation. Now that we're a 6 to 8 building versus having multiple transitions, it gives us an opportunity to do that more intentionally. So there are meetings with counselors between elementary schools and middle school of who students are, opportunities for parents to connect with elementary counselors to sort of balance some of those things. And similar between the middle school and the high school. Like over the last number of weeks, we've had high school counselors at the middle school really regularly sitting down with 8th grade students, talking about their schedule, talking about options that exist for them. And really, one, beginning to build that connection, but also that kids are making, along with their parents, educated decisions on what they want to do in 9th grade. And so I think there's a good hand-to-hand. I think sometimes our transitions between buildings, I'm also a parent in the district, have felt, and when I've heard from parents, have felt kind of like a cliff, right? Like it's sort of like, good luck to you. And I think we're trying to be more intentional over at least the last 4 years that I've been at the middle years of having that feel like a handoff. That it's from one hand to the next and we're kind of moving kids along versus, good luck. Yeah, absolutely.
I know there are more questions. I know there are also folks here who came because they want to see some of the data. I know, speaking for myself, I'll stick around and help answer questions if there are more. We're going to pivot now to talk a little bit about some of the data. I want to thank our faculty, administrators for all the work you do every day and for answering questions.
Folks, we recognize we're about 20 minutes over. We do appreciate if you need to go. This will be posted. We'll also provide links to a lot of the other data sources that we've shared over this past year and prior. Just in December, we released the Strategic Plan Annual Report, and it's about 100 pages worth of data you can pour through. You're also welcome to look at our recent board meeting on detracking. We had a lot of data in that session as well. What we tried to do for tonight is to give new or different data from those. So if you say, well, wait, tell me more about OSTs, we've got that presentation too, and it'll be linked on the website. Let's dive in with our overview here. Some overview of what we're seeing, patterns and trends, and then we'll show you the graphs that back these up. What we're seeing is significant growth and achievement. You'll see facets of both for students who may have previously been in core classes. We also see stable performance for students who historically had been in what might have been called those higher tracks, and we'll show you again graphs for those. And when you look at our school programming as a whole, and a particular shout out to our middle school, on average, literally off the charts, we'll show you, high growth and high achievement for our typical Shaker Heights student. That's a lot of great news, and yet, as you heard in today's discussion, and some of you have additional questions about, there persist significant difference in outcomes based on race. That has persisted. What does success look like? Well, we're seeing great growth. We're seeing improved achievement. That disparity in outcome persists. We're not successful yet there. And while all students are exceeding growth, we're still noticing that white students are growing more than black peers when you see some of the charts that we'll show you here. Well, in order to close outcome differences in achievement, we have to accelerate growth dramatically for students who may not yet be performing on grade level. That's the equation that we're trying to seek that would have a more successful outcome, that we have accelerated growth for marginalized youth at such a level that we would have eliminated the differences in outcomes by race. That means the differences continue to be a challenge. A little bit of a brain break. Jen, what do you think? Executive decision. Do we do it in parts or we do it as a whole?
I think we do it as a whole.
We do it as a whole here, folks.
I think we do it as a whole, but share with you that this strategy it's called a slow release graph strategy, and its intention is to show how we model inquiry, we model open-ended questioning with students and things like that. But for the sake of time, we do want to share with you the graph. You can tell also just by looking at it how overwhelming it is. That's the purpose of the slow relief concept, is to really dive into the different components of it. But the gist of this graph, this is the most recent math data from our MAP test that was administered in the winter. So what you can tell from this graph is our data for those circles. There you see 6th grade in the upper, all 6, 7, and 8, all in that upper right quadrant, pardon me, it's a tongue twister, that indicates high achievement and high growth. And so when our teachers are also looking at this and unpacking the data at a grade level or a classroom level, they can see the different quadrant chart and make instructional decisions based on that individually as well. So this is kind of just showing overall from fall to winter the current kids that we have in our middle school. Thanks, John. The next graph is going to be disaggregated by race. So we do take this and kind of break it down. You'll see 6th, 7th, and 8th grade on the left side. The column that I would like to highlight is kind of over here, the observed growth. You can tell that our observed growth has exceeded our projection growth overall. So when we say the majority of in all races and grades, there are some exceptions which John has highlighted that we do recognize there's opportunities for growth and have conversations about data and trends. And this is one data point, one snapshot of a student of the school. And then on that far right column, you'll notice the students who met growth projections. MAP, because of norming it, they say about if you have the 50th percentile is the norm. And so when you have students that meet or exceed projected growth above the 50th percentile or 50th percent, that's something to celebrate and highlight. You'll notice there is, 6th grade white students, we have indicated that 80% of our students have met growth. And we also notice that 65% of our black students in 6th grade have met growth. So that goes back to that part that John has indicated and we're highlighting that we still know that there is room to go, and we are having conversations about those.
Do you have historical numbers? Those would be, we shared those at the board meeting, which we will link on the website. And we have that also in the annual report. We can link.
Can you just give like a voiceover?
Sure. Yes, we don't have historical here other than growth, but as far as achievement is concerned, and someone noted it earlier, we're actually seeing achievement in 8th grade algebra exceeding what it would have been in 8th grade just general math, particularly for our black children. The outcomes from the state assessment is higher now that we've shifted to Algebra 1 than it even was before, now that we're including all children. And so a lot of our state achievement data historically has gone up since we've made this change. Another thing I might note here, a few of you expressed concerns about how do we know that our students are still growing, or are they growing as much as we might expect. MAP uses statistical analysis to give you a projected growth estimate. You'll see that in this column here, as Jen noted. You'll notice in some areas, statistical projections might say a 6th grade white student would be projected to grow 4 points. They've grown 11, more than double, and in some cases triple this. So that would suggest to us that the growth of some of our students far exceeds what even the national expectation based on our metrics might be. And knowing that some of you really wanted to get deep in data, our intention is not to overwhelm you here, but it is to share with you a glimpse of some of the data that we look at to try to understand what is happening. We've noted a lot growth versus achievement. Both are critical. Growth explains how much a child has grown over time from the start of the year as the change over winter and spring progresses. Achievement is that grade level benchmark, okay? Let's take a look at both growth and achievement. We can just center for the sake of time here on 6th grade. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and you have your percentile keys here at the bottom. The red bars represent student performance in the 1st to 20th percentile, and you can see the percentile or quintiles go up from there. Certainly, we want all of our students here at the 61st and above. That would be exceeding a year's worth of growth, certainly. You'll notice 6th, and to a certain extent, 7th and 8th as well. Our students in the highest quintile there, 80th percentile above, as well as the second highest, 61st and above. That is roughly half of our students in the district. And you'll notice that achievement-wise, it has grown there in 6th grade. a little bit in 7th as well, and in 8th. Let's break it down a little bit further. These bigger bars here, as you see, 6th, 7th, and 8th, we want all the students certainly green and blue, but 50% and above is expected. Half of the students significantly exceeded our growth targets. Then we have achievement for fall, achievement for winter, and you can see how our students compare with national norms. So let me say it in a different way. Winter, 6th grade math, 37% of our students were in the top 20% of students in the nation who take the assessment. 20% were between the 61st and 80th percentile, and you can read it on and on from there. Okay? By breaking it down into quintiles, it answers some of those questions that we have around how are the students at different levels of performance performing over time, and we have the historical data we can share on the website for that as well. These were math. We did pull it apart for reading as well, but before we go there, we'd like to share a little bit about growth in depth.
Yeah, so this is growth tied to the state test. So we wanted to make sure that we modeled and shared with you both like MAP and the OST or EOC. So this is the growth trend. This is called EVOS data that comes out in October, and what it does is it measures the growth from a student. So if a student meets expectations, they've gone like a year around the track, for lack of a better word. We want the kids in the green, that middle line right there, that is meeting growth. Anywhere in the green from a -2 growth to 2 because of standard error, they accept that for growth. So the state, that green, am I explaining that right? The green area is meeting growth. So you'll notice that in 6th grade, for example, we have a lot of our dots are in blue and a little bit in that 24 year in that blue-green. That's blue is saying that they've exceeded growth. So our students in 6th grade math have exceeded their growth. In 7th grade, you'll notice that they've exceeded their growth as well. So this cohort here, this 2025, they're the ones that are currently our freshmen, just to kind of put it into perspective. The next graph will be our 8th grade, which is our Algebra 1. So we just want to be clear with that. So even though it's grade 8, it does list as Algebra 1. And then this is their growth data over the last 4 years. So when we talk about what are we doing differently, what data do we look at this and we think, okay, what instructional decisions, what can we try differently, what should we keep doing, what do we need to continue doing? And then you'll kind of see that the last 2 years, there's those kind of a thumbnail is what they call it, and that shows that it's beyond meeting growth. They're very, it kind of pushes it down the right side.
It is literally beyond what the chart can show because the team is so far above and beyond what others in Ohio might be performing at. Now, keep in mind, this is being compared even to 8th graders who are taking 8th grade math. They're comparing our students with all of the other students in Ohio. We've done a similar analysis here to share with you around reading. You can see top right quadrant, that's where you want to be. Really high growth, that's great. Really high achievement, that's even better because that means students are meeting and performing grade level expectations. You see a similar analysis here as we disaggregated for race in this most recent MAP administration in winter. You see less change between projected and observed in reading than you did math. You still see exceeding projections, just not as significantly as before. And similar to what we shared with math, we wanted to show a little bit of the MAP report for reading. I won't go in as much detail, but here again, you see the quintiles and how they break down. Something that I look for and love to see, how are we growing those higher quintiles? And you can see actually over time, those at the lowest, that bar shrinks. Those in the higher end, that bar grows. Essentially, that communicates students are shifting to the right of that graph. Lastly, we have the growth reports for reading here. You'll notice consistently 6th grade is off the charts, as we saw in most math cases. We also recognize, and it is on our attention. It's the attention of the team. 7th grade is a place where we need to invest in support, additional resources, and efforts. And in 8th grade, you'll notice that comes back around more recently. 23, 24 were highlight years off the charts. 25 were as predicted. We want to continue to be in that light blue, which means we're outpacing and exceeding all of our peers.
How would this have compared to if we looked back before the detracking? Like, because I think we're looking at like the performance of detracking during this. So we've gone back and looked at 2012 to 2015. Have you guys like gone and looked at what that looked like?
Yes, and I can share off the top of my head, but I would strongly encourage when we post this, and we can share maybe in a newsletter or otherwise, we have done many data reports on these. We can stretch back, we can look in past. One of the data points that I would want you to consider walking out, 2018, 2019, we go back and we look, how were student performance outcomes, disparities, proportions for students who were in 8th grade math versus Algebra 1 math? How did that break down on race? And what we're seeing is a significant growth in Black student achievement, even though we essentially accelerated everybody by a year. Achievement and growth are significantly above where they were. And I think that reiterates Mr. Foreman's point before, which was when you have tracking or different levels of courses, there is some settling of expectations. Rewriting that has systematically increased outcomes. And you can look at the data. We can share that with you very readily, both in presentations and in our annual report.
I think the other thing I would be curious about is like we're looking at a lot of averages right now. I think one of the things that was highlighted I think before is how do you think about that group that might be on an IEP or need that additional support, and how do you think about that group that sort of we touched on before that might have been that gift? It's like understanding that averages can hide a lot of what's actually happening. How do you think
absolutely. Oh, we think about that all the time. Disaggregating data on race and gender is critical. That's also why the annual report is over hundreds of pages. Yeah. Sure. Sure. I hear you.
So do you have that by groupings? Like
let me think on the annual report.
Really well historically is like encouraged a very high floor and pushed a very high ceiling. And like an average, like we can get to an average.
We agree. We agree.
Get to an average by pushing everything up. So like, I think that's one of the things I'd be curious about if you guys have looked at.
We do look at that. This is probably the best slice of life that I can share with you tonight is that map quintiles, which we even know that. Quintiles don't tell the whole story either. But when you look at the annual report, and I think we can reinvest in sharing that, it does break it down historically by achievement scores. It also has things like enrollment in our upper level courses and things of that nature, which I think is another success metric that we're looking at here.
Yeah, I would almost separate though access, critically important, from outcomes and achievement. Which
Agreed.
There's obviously a correlation because if you don't have the access, then you might not be able to achieve, but that achievement number itself.
We would wholly agree. I would wholly agree. Yeah. Yes, Emma.
In the 2025 annual report, the only thing that I see separated into the groups that we described right here, aka Black students, students with an IEP, students as gifted, and students experiencing poverty, those are only for the IB course enrollment, CTE programs, and CCP program. And for the 8th grade, like algebra and the detracking, that is what I can see from here, it only shows divided into race. So maybe is that a separate thing than the 2025?
Do me a favor. If we go to the appendix, are there pages and pages of like map and all of that? Yeah, right?
maybe when we're doing that, can you answer the 7th grade drop-off? Because it looks like there's a significant decrease between 6th and 7th grade, both when you look at...
Yeah, it's map and reading, yeah.
Both in math and reading, you see it by race, you see it here. So what's happening in 7th grade?
Well, yes. Yes. And our job is to look at the system and how we address that, right? Jen, do you want to share some of the work that you've done as a coach with 7th grade and what kinds of resources but also teacher support we're investing there?
Sure. I also think, too, the one thing to think about is we just had Woodbury 6th grade transition to the middle school, so 7th grade was a transitional year also. So I would be interested truthfully, for me to learn, to see how does that impact, you know, our 7th grade data as we have our 6th graders in the building a little bit longer. For 6th grade L&L, for example, over the last couple of years, we really kind of impacted like their curriculum development and looking at their pacing. We talk about which intervention courses, how are you supporting kids during like rater time and things like that. I think for 7th grade math, the same thing. You could see in 7th grade math, their growth over the last year jumped considerably, I think because of some of those conversations. We do have our HMH curriculum that we use. So 6th grade, 7th grade, and 6th and 7th grade are a compacted curriculum. So 6th grade teaches 6th grade standards with half-ish of 7th. 7th grade does 7th grade and half of 8th. So as we've kind of seen that progression of readiness and had time to become familiar with the curriculum post-pandemic, kind of getting our kids back into school, I think we've started to see how they're more ready for some of the math that we're ready to kind of share with them. Go ahead.
And I'd like to connect with something I heard in the back there too. I think post-pandemic, some of our expectations, not just in Shaker certainly, but we've seen it across the board, got wonky. Thoughts on homework, reading, do we read, how much do we read? These are kinds of questions that have changed significantly over the past several years that we are now investing, but reinvesting into those conversations so that we can clearly and vertically articulate expectations over time. And I think if our high school Lang and Lit teacher were here at the moment, she would certainly agree with that. We need to continue setting those fair but reasonable, high expectations for reading performance over grades.
Pandemic feels like an odd thing, though, because each grade would have experienced the pandemic. So if it really was pandemic driving it, I would expect to see the data by year drop, but we only see it in...
And that's what I mean. Allow me to clarify my expectations. I think we have some work to do to vertically articulate what's the handoff from 6th to 7th to 7th to 8th, because when you see a change like this, it means it's not scaffolded in such a way that it makes sense stepwise. So having our whole team together and defining what those expectations are so that you have this almost like a series of stairs as it goes to the high school, that is the work that I think we need to do.
So you're saying there's a jump in 7th grade that the kids aren't...
I'm saying we're investigating what is causing this.
We got it. No, it's fine.
Did you want to add something?
No, I can add later.
I know there are still hands up. I kind of want to just read the room a little bit because we're over time, and I know there are people who have invested time this evening to be here who may want to go home. Maybe it's just about 7:45. We'll take one or two more comments or questions, wrap up, and again, I'm happy to stay longer for people who want to come up. Emma, and then maybe last question, and then again, we'll stick around afterwards.
Thank you. So here on the 2025 annual report, I went to the appendix, and it only shows for the algebra classes. I'm using that as an example because as a gifted student, I feel that's what impacted me the most. And as other people said, I feel like, this year there are 42 teachers retiring and across the district, and students need to have a teacher. You can't just be giving students videos and Delta Maths. That's what was given to me. And in 8th grade, my teacher told me to just suck it up and hear your Delta Maths, and that they have to deal with the students who can't catch up. And I'm already far ahead. Sorry. I'm failing math this year. I almost failed math last year. The district failed me with math, and among other things, but I'm looking at what the annual report says. It says all students, Black students, students with an IEP, and students in poverty. Yes, that covers a broad, many students. Where are the gifted students? Where am I in the data? And I know that may be a small number of students, but you are saying this data, you're not accounting for every student, like how you said that there are things outside of just the data that need to be counted for and that aren't necessarily shown in that, median perspective. And as Doug Wang once said at a board meeting, not everything that counts can be counted. And I think that is very important that the district needs to be focusing on, because you failed me in math, and by hearing what you're doing with detracking, it sounds like that's still happening. And I mean, you told me look through the appendix. I mean, I'm looking. It doesn't show anything. It just shows the exams taken and whether they passed or not. And there needs to be so much more.
Where we did send some a vertical group to, I always mispronounce his last name, Rick Wormley or Wormley, I'm unsure. But we sent a group of vertical teachers there. He's a differentiation kind of guru, for lack of a better word. And so we really came as a group, kind of what did you learn, what strategies did you try? And then as an instructional coach, part of my role is to go back and support the implementation, the creation, co-teach, model, whatever it is to kind of provide that like in the classroom job embedded support. Another one, Math 8, for example, did a book study with building thinking classrooms, and that's where the practice of the vertical whiteboard spaces have come from, and that you would see implemented in many of the classrooms on many of the days. So those are two bigger things. Throughout the day, throughout the school week, we have professional learning time kind of built in with department chairs. We also have common planning time where we kind of push in and determine, whatever the department chairs kind of needs are. If they have questions, it might be data analysis. It might be, hey, I need this idea, this differentiation idea. I know what I want to do for tier 1, and how can we think about that so all kids can access this and still have the same exit ticket at the end of the day.
So teachers are feeling like they're getting the support from that.
I would say yes, and there's always room for more, and there's not enough. And because you want that magic wand, that one thing that will really, really work all the time, and there's a lot of different strategies or ideas that you have to, create. So I would say yes, and there's more, always room for more.
Yeah, it's not a one size fits all.
Right.
What works in one class doesn't work for the next class. Yeah. So like having kids. A lot of the things that I mentioned earlier, I apologize if they were misunderstood as instructional strategies. It sounded, I just wanted to let you know that we are differentiating. Those are ways that we are differentiating, ways that we can make ourselves more available so we can have one-on-one conversations with the students so that they can take more ownership in their learning and kind of determine what they know and what they don't know. And it's a learning experience, and every class is different. And so we will teach one way, second period, and say, oh, we got to change things. We're always changing things on the fly. And we have this toolbox, and we just continue to add to it and utilize what resources are available and try to find things, create things when they aren't available. So different visual representations for students who need things broken down, different scaffolds, different types of questioning that we're asking students. So I apologize if I was misspoken earlier.
I know there are still some comments and questions. I also want to be respectful of everybody's time. We are going to post this video and assorted resources to our website so that you can follow up afterwards. Also, I know from previous superintendent series that this is often the continuation of a conversation. It's not usually the beginning, it's not the end. And if there are either other questions or comments or thoughts that come to your mind after this evening, or that your friends or neighbors or others have, please do not hesitate to reach out. We are definitely eager to continue to engage in this conversation. It is hard work, it is challenging work, and it is important to do the work together. So thank you, everybody. A few of us will stick around if you want to come up and ask other questions, but appreciate spending your evening with us. Thank you.